The Florida sun spilled over the marshes as Mason Cooper sipped his coffee on the porch, two German shepherds at his feet. Duke, the massive one with a coat like soaked ash and fire, and Bella, smaller, her movements still hesitant but growing bolder each day. The Everglades stirred with life, but this quiet morning betrayed nothing of what was coming. Mason had known loss, his wife Sarah taken by cancer, leaving behind a silence that even the swamp couldn't match. But the dogs, especially Duke, had filled part of that void. Duke was no ordinary rescue. 3 years earlier, during a flood, Mason found him standing guard over a terrified boy on a collapsing rooftop, his own body torn and bleeding but unmoving, until the child was safe. Mason remembered the moment Duke collapsed, his mission complete, the weight of survival finally too much. No one ever came to claim Duke. His scars spoke of hardship, but his instincts were extraordinary. He could sense danger in the air, track underwater trails, and navigate the swamp as if he had been born in its muddy heart. Abby, the vet, once said she'd never seen an animal so determined to live. Duke, they all agreed, was part legend now. And then came Bella. Chained and starved on an abandoned property, she'd arrived trembling, half her weight. But when Duke saw her, something in him softened. That night, he refused to leave her crate. He simply lay beside her, as though holding vigil for something he'd once lost. Like recognizes like, Abby had whispered to Mason. From that moment on, the two dogs were inseparable. They patrolled the park as a pair, Duke with his silent strength, Bella with a nose sharper than anything the Rangers had seen. Even the hardened Ranger Jess, former military, found herself sneaking treats to the duo. She called them working dogs, but the way she watched them told another story. That morning, as the mist curled above the wetlands and Duke nudged Mason's hand to start the day, something ancient shimmered in the stillness. A sense that this bond, this fragile, silent contract between man, beast, and wounded loyalty, was about to be tested in ways none of them could imagine. Their patrol began like any other. Mason, Duke, and Bella moved along the western boundary, where tourist trails faded into wild, reclaimed land. The dogs drifted ahead, alert and easy, weaving through brush with purpose. The sun rose heavier now, dragging humidity in its wake, the air thick with the musk of peat and distant cypress. Mason had stopped to check a disturbance reported at an observation platform, overturned bins, claw marks, maybe raccoons. But then Duke returned alone, panting, his amber eyes wild. He tugged urgently at Mason's pants. "What is it, boy? Where's Bella?" Duke took off without waiting, his paws thudding against the damp trail, glancing back to make sure Mason followed. The Ranger's heart tightened. Duke never left Bella, not unless something was deeply wrong. They ran beyond marked paths, into overgrown ruins of a once-planned tourism zone, visitor centers now swallowed by vines, walkways cracked and broken. The past reclaimed by the swamp. Duke moved like a compass needle, pulling Mason deeper into silence. Then he stopped, rigid as stone at the edge of a clearing. Mason slowed, sweat soaking through his back. The heat was oppressive, but something colder prickled down his spine. Duke's low growl vibrated the air, and then Mason heard it. A hiss. Not the short, sharp warning of local snakes. This was lower, longer, a sound that felt too ancient to belong. Drawing his sidearm, Mason stepped forward, heart pounding. Around the corner of a collapsed building, the scene unfolded like a nightmare. Bella lay crumpled on sun-cracked pavement, her body wrapped in the crushing embrace of a python, thicker than Mason's thigh, at least 16 feet of muscle, hunger, and silent death. The coils pulsed with cruel rhythm, squeezing the life from her inch by inch. Mason radioed headquarters, voice clipped with urgency. "Bella's caught in a python. Huge one. I need immediate backup." He turned to Duke, expecting a charge. But Duke stood frozen, trembling violently, ears pinned, eyes wide. The fearless guardian of the swamps, the dog who had faced floods, gators, even poachers, was paralyzed by terror. Mason didn't understand, not yet. But something ancient and buried had surfaced in Duke. Something not just afraid of the snake, but broken by it. The python tightened. Bella's breaths came in shallow rasps. Mason took a step forward, tranquilizer gun raised, every nerve screaming that time was vanishing. And then Duke collapsed. Not in fear, but as if struck by something unseen, his body twitching, eyes rolling. For a moment, Mason thought he'd lost him too. But then Duke's eyes snapped open, and what stared back was not the same dog. It was a soul surfacing from trauma. Mason had seen flashbacks in combat veterans, men lost in memories, untouchable by words. Duke was locked in one now, his breathing ragged, limbs frozen, eyes distant as if watching an older horror replay beneath this one. Later, Abby would find the scars, long, twisting grooves beneath his coat that matched the coils of a snake. Mason would remember her quiet words. He's been through this before, and somehow survived. But in this moment, all Mason saw was the dog he trusted with his life, broken. "Duke," Mason whispered, kneeling beside him. "She needs you." Duke twitched at Bella's strangled whimper. The snake shifted, annoyed by Mason's presence, but undeterred. The ranger inched closer, each second tightening the vise on Bella's ribs. He had one shot with the tranquilizer. The wrong angle, the wrong dose, and she'd die. Then came a sound, low and mournful. A howl from Duke so guttural it vibrated the earth. It wasn't rage. It was memory clawing its way out of a cage. And then he stood. Shakily, one paw at a time, his massive frame rising like a monument rebuilt from ruin. His ears pricked, his eyes burned, not with fear now, but with something deeper. Purpose. He looked once at Mason, then at Bella, and he charged, not blindly. This was not chaos, but calculation. Duke didn't aim for the head or tail. He went for the heart of the grip, the thickest coil crushing Bella's chest. His jaws locked, teeth sinking deep, and the snake writhed, loosening just enough. That was Mason's chance. He fired the dart. It struck near the base of the spine. The python recoiled, but the sedative would take time. Duke clung with feral strength, blood mixing, his and the serpent's, as Bella gasped one trembling breath. Duke held on. The python twisted violently, its massive coils thrashing across broken concrete. Blood smeared the ground in red arcs. Mason's radio crackled with Jessica's voice. 2 minutes out. But every second stretched like hours. The python began to unwind from Bella, its focus shifting to the threat tearing into its flank. But Duke was relentless. His teeth dug deeper, even when the snake's body whipped sideways, slamming him into rusted metal and shattered glass. He refused to let go. Mason moved fast, crouched beside Bella. Her body was limp, breaths shallow but present. "Hold on, girl," he muttered, feeling the flutter of her chest. The sound of tires crunching gravel burst through the chaos. Jessica and 2 rangers came running. One look and she dropped into a crouch beside Mason. "Plan?" she shouted. "Duke's distracting it. We pull Bella free on 3. They counted in silence. 1, 2, 3. Together, they dragged Bella's limp form away, her legs trailing like ribbon. At once, Duke shifted his assault, launching a fresh attack just as the snake tried to wrap around him. His teeth found flesh again, clamping down with a snarl that ripped through the clearing. The python, now groggy from the tranquilizer and bleeding from multiple bites, slowed. Its immense muscles twitched, no longer synchronized. It tried once more to coil, but Duke dodged, blood dripping from his chest and neck. Only when Bella was safely behind a human wall did Duke release his grip. He staggered back, chest heaving, muzzle soaked in crimson. The snake slumped fully, its body finally succumbing to the sedative. "Transport crate," Mason ordered. "This one goes to the lab." But even as the team rushed to contain the python, Mason's eyes were on Duke. The dog stood over Bella, legs trembling from exertion and blood loss, but his gaze never wavered. He nudged her gently, a whimper escaping his throat. When Mason reached to lift her, Duke growled, not in aggression, but warning, protective instinct overriding even trust. "It's me," Mason said softly. "We're helping her." Duke stepped back reluctantly, limping heavily. Blood oozed from puncture wounds along his flank. He pressed against the ranger's leg, his breathing shallow, his eyes locked on Bella's motionless form. The battle was over, but what it cost was only just beginning to show. The wildlife clinic was already in motion when Mason's truck skidded to a halt. Abby Winters stood waiting at the door, surgical gloves halfway on, her sharp eyes catching every limp, every twitch, every drop of blood on the dogs before a word was spoken. "Exam 1, she directed, and Mason rushed Bella inside. Duke limped behind them, refusing help, his wounded leg dragging like a broken branch. Jessica reached for his collar, but the moment she pulled, Duke growled, low and guttural, not hostile, but primal. He would not be separated from Bella. "Let him stay," Mason said quietly. "He earned it." Abby nodded. Bella's chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm. The python's crushing coils had broken ribs, maybe worse. Abby's hands moved fast over her body, checking vitals, probing gently, voice clipped with urgency. 3 ribs at least, collapsed lungs likely, prep for x-rays. Duke circled the table, nails clicking, blood trailing behind him. He tried to jump up, but his leg gave out. A frustrated whine rose from his throat. He wouldn't leave her. He couldn't. When Jessica offered to take him to another room for treatment, Duke refused again, planting his feet, eyes flashing. He wasn't being difficult. He was grieving, guarding, loving. So they let him stay. Through x-rays, scans, and diagnosis, Duke was a silent sentinel. When Bella was wheeled into surgery, he finally allowed Mason to guide him outside the operating room. But even then, he lay against the door, unmoving. Jessica cleaned his wounds, murmuring to him. "You're more than instinct, aren't you?" she said, dabbing at the blood. "You made a choice." Duke didn't flinch, not when antiseptic stung, not when his torn shoulder was stitched. Only when the surgical door opened did he lift his head. Abby emerged, gown stained, her eyes tired but alive with relief. "She's stable. Surgery went well. Broken ribs set, lung reinflated. She'll make it." Duke whimpered. Abby smiled. "Yes, you can see her." They brought Bella into recovery. Soft lighting, padded bedding, gentle monitors. Duke didn't rush. He walked to her with the reverence of a soldier returning from war. He sniffed her face, then curled beside her, not touching, but close enough that when she woke, she'd know. He was there. Duke never left. The first night Mason tried to stay, but Abby insisted he rest. "I've got the shift. They need peace, not exhaustion," she said. Mason hesitated, until Abby added, "I won't separate them." From that moment on, Duke became part of the clinic. He refused food, refused to leave Bella's side. Staff brought his meals to her room, but he barely touched them. Mason sat with him, coaxing bites from his hand, but it was like trying to feed a ghost. He's grieving, Abby explained. Not because she's dying, because she almost did. By the fourth day, Bella stirred for the first time. Her eyes fluttered open, cloudy with medication. A soft whimper escaped her, and Duke, who had been sleeping with one eye open, rose instantly. He sniffed her muzzle, then did something that stopped the room. He licked her gently and lay in her line of sight, head on paws. Her tail thumped. His followed. It was the first moment of light the staff had seen in days. On the fifth day, Harold Watson, the retired vet, shuffled in with a basket of peanut butter bacon treats and eyes full of quiet knowing. "You and me," he said to Duke. "We've both watched someone we love hurt and stood guard anyway." Mason watched as Harold tried something different. He offered a treat to Bella first, letting her catch the scent. Then, he offered it to Duke. Duke accepted. It was the first food he'd taken voluntarily in nearly a week. "Old trainer's trick," Harold chuckled. "Let him see she wants it. It brings him back." By the end of the hour, Duke had eaten 6 treats and a full cup of food. Harold stood at the door, voice soft. "People think animals don't feel like we do. They're wrong. That dog's not just surviving. He's choosing to suffer alongside her. That's not instinct. That's love." The room was quiet after he left. Duke lay beside Bella, their bodies not quite touching, but surrounded by each other's scent. Mason ran his hand along Duke's back and murmured, "You're holding on for her." And Duke, without lifting his head, thumped his tail once against the floor. A week after the attack, the sky turned strange. Low clouds swollen with thunder, the kind of electric pressure that made even birds fall silent. Abby had ordered an ultrasound for Bella after some irregular blood work. Mason held her still while Abby moved the wand across her abdomen. Then Abby paused. Her expression changed from clinical to stunned. "She's pregnant," she whispered. Mason stared at the screen. Small bean-shaped shadows flickered like ghosts. 6 weeks, Abby added. 5 puppies, maybe more. Mason felt the breath catch in his throat. Somewhere in that abandoned property where Bella had been chained and forgotten, life had already begun growing inside her. Despite the attack, despite the injuries, life had endured. Duke approached the ultrasound screen, tilting his head. He looked from the shapes to Bella, then back again. A soft, questioning whine escaped him. "You think he understands?" Abby asked. Mason, eyes still on Duke, nodded slowly. "I think he knows more than we do." The news changed everything. Bella's care plan shifted, her food adjusted, her meds balanced for pregnancy. Jessica showed up the next morning with dog pregnancy guides claiming, "I just like to be prepared." No one argued. Bella's recovery continued, slow but steady, and Duke changed again. He began inspecting her each morning, nose to tail, checking her bandages like a nurse with 4 legs. He dragged his blanket piece by piece from his bed to hers, surrounding her in his scent. He refused treats unless she was offered first. "It's like he's become a provider," Abby said, watching him nudge her water bowl closer after she stirred. The world noticed, too. The local newspaper ran the story. "Park dog battles python to save companion." Then the state picked it up. Then national outlets. People donated, commented, cried, called him a hero. Mason declined interviews. "They need peace," he said. But the clinic's social media account posted quiet updates, and thousands of messages poured in from across the country. Duke didn't notice the fame. He only watched Bella, and one evening, as she shifted in her sleep, he rose and gently adjusted the edge of her blanket with his nose, laying it neatly across her side. Then, without a sound, he sat back down, eyes soft, as though guarding not just a life, but a future. The storm arrived with a vengeance, Lightning cracked the sky open as if clawing through the swamp's heavy breath. Rain hammered the center's roof. Wind howled through the trees. The power flickered once, twice, then went out. Jessica burst into the staff room. "The generator's down. Lightning strike. I'm checking the fuel line." Mason didn't hesitate. He grabbed his flashlight and ran straight for Bella's room. He heard Duke before he saw him. A deep, low growl, the kind that vibrates through the ribs. Then, an urgent bark, sharp and commanding. Mason rounded the corner to find Duke standing like a statue of fury beside Bella's bed, eyes fixed on the rain-lashed window, body trembling with something more than fear. It was memory. The storm, the darkness, the chaos. It was too much. Bella whimpered, trying to lift her head. Abby appeared at the door, but the moment she stepped inside, Duke moved in front of her, baring his teeth, not with aggression, but raw panic. "Don't," Mason warned. "He's triggered." Abby stopped cold. "I need to check Bella. Her monitors are down." Mason knelt, reaching for Duke. "It's me, boy. It's Mason." Duke's eyes flicked toward him, wild and unseeing. He wasn't just afraid. He was gone, swallowed by flashbacks. His rescue had happened during a flood. He had once survived a python attack. Now it was all back. Storm, dark, danger, helplessness. Bella tried to move again, whimpering louder. Abby whispered, "Wait." She ducked away and returned moments later with Duke's patrol vest, his symbol of purpose, of identity. Maybe this will ground him. Mason took the vest and held it out. "Duke," he said gently, "look what I've got." Duke hesitated, staring at the familiar fabric. Slowly he stepped forward, sniffing it, then pressed his head against it. Mason slipped it over his shoulders. With every buckle clipped, Duke seemed to remember who he was. His breathing steadied, his stance lifted. "You're on duty now," Mason said softly. "She needs you to let us help." Duke stepped aside. Abby approached Bella, hands steady, voice calm. A thunderclap exploded overhead. Duke flinched but stayed put, body taut but anchored. Then Bella made a soft sound, a breathy chuff, almost like a name. Duke turned. She made the sound again, and like a switch being thrown, Duke's body melted. He walked to her, curled beside her gently, and exhaled, all the fear pouring out with that single breath. "She calmed him," Abby whispered, stunned. Mason nodded. "Even now. She's protecting him." The storm passed, but its echo lingered. That night, as rain softened to a whisper, Duke lay with his head against Bella's side. Mason sat beside them, offering food. Duke actually ate, slowly but willingly. It was a fragile victory. Jessica entered with news. 2 more illegal pythons had been found, alive, in a downtown apartment. One was female, likely larger than the one that attacked Bella. The smuggler linked to the original snake had been found dead, possibly killed by one of his own animals. Several snakes remained missing. Danger still stalked the Everglades. But inside the clinic, the danger had turned inward. Duke's health, though stable for the moment, showed signs of deeper strain. He was eating more, but not enough. His weight dropped steadily, his eyes dulled between moments of alertness. When he wasn't near Bella, he would search for her, even within the same room, even in sleep. Abby and Mason met in her office to go over new test results. Blood work showed worsening anemia, elevated liver enzymes. His immune system was fraying. "It's not just his injuries," Abby said quietly. "It's grief, PTSD. He's unraveling because he won't let himself rest. His world has become her." Mason looked down at Duke curled at his feet. "We can't separate them. It would break him." "We won't," Abby replied, "but we need to act." They agreed on a delicate protocol: subcutaneous fluids, high-calorie feeding, round-the-clock observation. Mason would personally oversee every meal, stay for every injection. Still, the most powerful medicine remained Bella, her presence, her recovery, her breath. That week, Harold returned, basket of treats in hand, his old eyes sharper than ever. He listened to the updates, nodded slowly, and said the same truth he always did. Trauma lives in the body. The only thing that brings it back out is connection. Not pills, not stitches, someone who stays with you in the dark. As if on cue, Duke stirred, and for the first time since the python attack, climbed slowly onto Bella's bed. He curled around her carefully, his large frame folding itself so delicately, it seemed impossible for something that strong to be that gentle. Bella let out a deep sigh and nestled beneath his chin. Mason exhaled. So did Harold. "Ain't that a picture?" the old man said softly. It became their ritual. Every morning, Duke inspected Bella from nose to tail. Soft sniffs, gentle nudges, pausing at every bandage as if verifying she was still healing. His blanket surrounded her now, piece by piece dragged from his bed until her recovery space smelled wholly of him. He refused treats unless offered to her first. If Bella showed interest, only then would Duke eat. If she turned her head, so did he. Provider instinct, Abby noted. He's shifted from warrior to caregiver. Mason had seen soldiers do the same, men who survived war only to become protectors of those more vulnerable. In Duke's case, that role seemed to be all that kept him alive. But Duke's body was wearing thin. His ribs stood sharper beneath his coat, his eyes rimmed with weariness. He flinched when lightning flashed outside, but stayed beside Bella even as thunder cracked again. The only time he rested was when she sighed into sleep beside him. Meanwhile, Bella was growing stronger. Her breathing steadied. She could stand for brief periods. Her tail wagged, weak but deliberate, when Duke entered the room. Mason caught her watching him with a softness that animals rarely display openly. It wasn't instinct. It wasn't habit. It was trust, deep, earned, and wordless. The story continued to spread. The Everglades Clinic received letters, donations, art from children. People sent blankets, food, collars with Duke's name engraved on silver tags. A dog rescue organization pledged ongoing support. A senator mentioned them in a speech about animal protection. But the clinic stayed quiet. Mason refused all interviews. "This is not a story for cameras," he said. "It's a story for healing." Even Jess, the hardened ex-military ranger, no longer scoffed at sentiment. She walked softer around Bella's room. Once, she stood silently for 10 minutes watching Duke nudge Bella's bowl closer, then left without a word. Something in everyone had changed. Harold said it best one afternoon as he set down another batch of homemade treats. "They're not just healing each other. They're teaching us about grief, about presence, about what it means to stay." He paused, watching as Duke gently licked Bella's ear while she slept. "People talk about miracles," Harold added, voice hushed. "But this is just love that never gave up." 3 weeks after the attack, the center's routine was disrupted again, this time not by trauma, but by mystery. Abby called Mason into her office. Bella's latest blood work showed new complications. "Something's off," she said, concerned. "We need an ultrasound now." During the scan, Mason stood by Bella's side, hand on her paw. Duke was close, watching intently, tail barely twitching. Abby's face tensed as she moved the probe. Then she froze. "Oh no." "What is it?" Mason asked, heart lurching. "The placenta," Abby murmured. "It's separating. She's going into premature labor." Bella whimpered softly. Duke growled. not at her, but at the room, the equipment, the sense that something was wrong and no one could fix it. The emergency unfolded fast. Abby began prepping medications to delay labor. "If we can stabilize her, we might buy a few more days," she said. "Best case, she carries to term. Worst case." She didn't finish. Didn't have to. Bella trembled. Her breathing quickened. Blood spots appeared on the blanket beneath her. Duke paced frantically, circling the bed, then standing statue still, his eyes locked on Bella. His body radiated tension. Abby had never seen him like this, not even after the attack. It was as if he were holding the weight of both of them now. Mason tried to calm him. "She's strong. So are you." But Duke didn't react. He stood rigid, a sentinel made of bone and breath and love. Abby stabilized Bella with fluids and medication, then prepped a genetic test. "We need to rule out internal rejection," she explained. "There might be something in the fetuses contributing to the crisis." Mason nodded, though every word felt like it was being spoken underwater. They'd come so far. And now? The storm outside returned. Dark clouds rolled back over the wetlands. The clinic lights flickered, but this time, the power held. Still, Mason saw the flicker of panic in Duke's eyes. He laid a hand on the dog's neck, grounding him. "She needs you now more than ever." Duke blinked slowly. Then, as if understanding, he laid his body alongside Bella's, not quite touching her abdomen, but near enough that she'd feel his warmth. He rested his chin beside her muzzle and closed his eyes. The fight wasn't over, and this time, they'd face it together. Night fell quietly, but inside the clinic, no one rested. Bella's vitals fluctuated. Her breath came in waves, sometimes smooth, sometimes rasping. Abby monitored her hour by hour, eyes weary, but unwavering. Mason stayed close, his hand rarely leaving Bella's paw or Duke's thick fur. Duke hadn't moved in hours. His head lay beside Bella's, his eyes fixed on hers. She stirred, whined, shifted, but never alone. He was there, present, anchored. Then, just before dawn, something shifted. Bella's breathing evened out. The bleeding slowed, her muscles relaxed. Abby's voice cracked when she confirmed it. "She's stabilizing. The medication's working. For now." Outside, the storm faded. Sunlight pressed against the windows like a prayer. Mason exhaled for the first time in hours. She bought them more time. Duke stood slowly, carefully, and stepped to the side, allowing Abby to examine Bella. His body trembled, but not from fear this time. From fatigue. Harold arrived just after sunrise, bearing warm biscuits and a silence that said everything. He looked at Duke, thinner now, bones visible under the thick fur, and shook his head softly. "You've poured everything into her," he said. "Now you've got to save a little for yourself." Duke blinked, unmoved. "Stubborn," Harold added, a touch of admiration in his voice. "But maybe that's what makes love last." Bella's condition remained stable for the next 2 days. The puppies, according to another scan, were developing well, unharmed, somehow untouched by all the trauma. A quiet miracle. But Mason knew the storm hadn't passed. It had simply paused. There were still at least 3 massive pythons unaccounted for, one of them possibly larger than the one that had attacked Bella. Police were now investigating links to organized exotic pet trafficking. The rangers prepared for wider sweeps. Patrols increased. The Everglades whispered of threats still hidden beneath its green and gold surface. And in the quiet of the recovery room, Duke slept for the first full night since the attack. Curled beside Bella, his body finally still, his breath deep and even. Bella nuzzled closer in her sleep, her muzzle beneath his chin. 2 dogs, wounded, scarred, still healing, but together. When Mason looked in on them that night, He didn't speak. He just stood there for a moment, watching, listening, feeling something that could only be called grace. The storm had not broken them. It had revealed them.